I'm Steve Smedley, Associate Director here at Acuity, and welcome to the 7th of 8 webinars we're holding in October. We'd also like to welcome back Emma Foxall, Deputy Ombudsman, who very kindly said she'd come back and talk to us about the complaints handling code once it had been issued. The code completely overhauls, I think, the complaint system. I think there's still a few issues to be resolved, like what do we do about the democratic filter and stuff, which I'm sure Emma will get stuck into.
Thanks very much, Steve. So thank you very much for inviting me back. As promised, I will go through the complaint handling code, looking at where it's landed and some of the issues that have come up, and answer some of the questions that have come up. And I'll also just run through where we're at with the new Housing Ombudsman scheme and some of the powers that came in with that, as well as implementation and timings. And then I'm happy to take any questions that everybody has. Okay. So just a reminder of where we were and why the code, we decided to work on the code. If you remember the slide I used last time with those quotes from residents about what residents had said about the difficulties that they had in bringing a complaint and feeling that they weren't being listened to and were not heard by their landlords. So there was the information was that they were unable to find information on complaints processes. Once they did manage to get into the process, they found the process difficult to navigate and difficult to get through to the end. That there was a perception that there's this sort of lack of consistency between landlords, so that your neighbour could have a very similar complaint and that could be treated completely differently because their landlord was a different landlord. That complaints process took too long, and that they were unable to hold landlords to account. So all this was sort of emphasised and highlighted in the green paper, and we are still waiting for the white paper. I believe it will be out before Christmas, but I think every month I've been saying I believe it will be out next month, this month, and here we still are. So, but that's just sort of a reminder of what the green paper identified as some of the issues with complaint handling across the sector. And from our experience, what we were experiencing were delays in getting landlords to engage with residents who were in the complaints procedure. So there was issues with either not accepting a complaint or moving the complaint on to the next stage. So we were seeing quite a lot of that. And there were also delays in engaging with us, so providing evidence for investigations could take a really long time to get the evidence in, numerous requests, etc. So we decided we would see what we could do under our scheme that didn't require legislation, to see if there were issues that we could, some of these issues we could actually deal with before waiting for the white paper. And so part of that was our changes to our scheme, and then we issued our complaint handling code. We consulted with the sector, we spoke to residents and landlords and lots of the sort of trade bodies, so TPAS, Tarot, the NFA and Arch, and they're all listed there, some of the ones we did, as well as some individual landlords being part of the sort of working group. We also looked at what the regulator requirements were in relation to complaint handling, so that we would incorporate what you were already being asked to do in the code. So the regulatory requirements are that there's a clear, simple, accessible approach to complaint handling that offers a range of ways for tenants to express a complaint, sets out clear service standards, explains what to do if you're unhappy with an outcome, so escalation, inform tenants how complaints are used to improve the service, so that learning from complaints piece, and publish information about the number, nature and outcomes of complaints each year, so that sort of transparency to residents as to how complaints, or what complaints your landlord is dealing with. So if that's the background, we then issued our code, and the aim of the code is very much to be a sort of useful working tool for the sector. So it aims to be a framework that would promote good quality complaint handling. It's not intended to be a stick, but rather aims to sort of promote better practice across the sector. The code's split into 6 sections. So there's the definition of a complaint, accessibility, and then we set out some procedures and timescales. Then there's fairness, then there's the remedies piece of putting things right, and then the learning and improvement and self-assessment. So some of these things we have been promoting for many years. Some of the stuff in the code is not new, and I suspect for all of you there will be things in your complaints procedure that matches and marries up with what we suggest in the code. So greater access and consistency are one of the things we're seeking to promote, a much faster resolution of complaints. Really finding ways to use the learning from complaints to drive your service improvements. And the code really tries to get boards on board with the idea that boards have a role in setting the right culture for an organisation, particularly in relation to complaints. And we tried to be prescriptive only where we thought it really mattered. So there is an awful lot of discretion throughout the code. You know your residents, you know what works best for your for the people who use your service. So we tried to just sort of put in place a sort of the things that we thought made a good complaint handling. So frequently when I would be out and about, I would be asked, you know, so how do we know what good looks like? And so this is what we've tried to capture in the code. To some degree, it differs from other best practice because some of the things in the code are a requirement, and you will be we will be assessing against the code when we look at complaints that come to us for investigation. So the first issue is that we address is what is a complaint. So we are promoting a universal definition of a complaint that defines any sort of expression of dissatisfaction, however that might be made, about the standard of service, actions or lack of actions by the organisation, its own staff or those acting on its behalf, affecting an individual resident or a group of residents. So tried to sort of capture a bit of accessibility there, that it doesn't matter whether you don't use the official form to make a complaint. If you're emailing your landlord or writing to your landlord expressing your dissatisfaction with some element of the service, that should be treated as a complaint. And again, try to capture that those acting on behalf of the landlord, so your contractors, should also be treated as a complaint if you get a concern raised by your residents there. Okay, so there's requirements throughout the code about improving accessibility and awareness of complaints procedure, the code in general, and basically residents' rights to access Housing Ombudsman Service. So all of that is tried to be picked up in the code. We have had, in terms of sort of, we've run quite a lot of webinars already. I think we've actually spoken to or been party to webinars with about 1,000 participants so far. So we have had quite a lot of questions and clarifications, and what I would say is there are now quite detailed FAQs on our website, but that's not to deter you from asking any questions today. It's just if something else occurs to you afterwards, then you may find the answer there if you need to go and look. One of the things that came up about the definition is very recently the LGSCO, the local government ombudsman, issued a sort of review of their effective complaint handling process with a slightly different complaint definition. However, we have both organisations met to discuss this recently, and we're both of the view that there is no real material difference between the two definitions. So if you are a council and you choose to use the other definition, which is complaint is an expression of dissatisfaction about a council service, whether that service is provided directly by the council or by a contractor or partner that requires a response. So it's quite similar. So I think if you decide you want to use that definition, that would be fine. But I would just make sure that if you do speak to any of our staff, that you are clear that you're using the LGSCO Ombudsman guidance. Okay, so the code goes on to look at the structure of a complaints procedure, and it promotes 2 stages as a minimum and 3 stages as a maximum. The idea being that those 1-stage complaints procedures don't satisfy the rules of natural justice, in that they often don't provide the residents with the chance to challenge. So it may be that a response is the first time that a resident has seen a piece of evidence or seen an interpretation of the facts, and then they don't provide an opportunity for that resident to then raise any of those concerns. So we think 2 stages works best. If you are going to use a 3rd stage, I would just say, just sort of be mindful of how timely you can keep your process, and if possible, I think those 3rd stages work well if you can have some level of resident involvement. Okay, so the code has clear timescales for responses as well. So you've got 10 days plus an additional 10 days for your stage 1s, and 20 days plus an additional time period for your stage 2s. So if, again, there is discretion there if you think you need longer to take longer, but what we're asking is that you keep the resident informed, you're explaining why you need more time, and don't leave those complaints that are just sort of open-ended. So we see quite a lot of complaints, particularly in relation to repairs, where a resident is complaining about delays in relation to a repair, and then the complaint is kept open pending the completion of the repair. So from a resident perspective, what they've got is a repair that's not being progressed and a complaint that's not being progressed, and they can't get any further. So we would ask that you deal with the complaint. Your complaint response can be, this is the timescale that we're using to deal with your repair. And again, there is example letters on our website in the FAQs, particularly dealing with that issue, because that has come up as well as a sort of fairly frequent question. The next section looks at fairness in complaint handling and ensuring that you're thinking about the resident and the outcomes that may resolve the issue. And again, I think for us there is sort of a repackaging of the work we've done for many years in terms of our dispute resolution principles of be fair, put things right, and offer suitable redress if necessary. So some of the stuff that you will see there should be quite familiar. Okay, then we look at again that sort of put things right when they've gone wrong. So taking action and appropriate remedies. And again, I would say if you are you want guidance on remedies and what is an appropriate remedy, we have quite a detailed policy on our website that will set out how we look at what could be an appropriate remedy. So again, have a look there if you're struggling to think what might work for this complainant. Okay, so the next section seeks to sort of look at the role of boards and how you can create a positive complaint handling culture. And then continuous learning and improvement, and the learning with evidence in your annual reports. So I guess the overall aim is that swift complaint resolution that is fair to all residents and treats residents fairly. Get your boards involved. Boards do have a role in that sort of setting the culture for complaint handling, and that sort of scrutiny role of balancing staff taking responsibility with a sort of no blame culture, ensuring that the executives and organisation are promoting that sort of cross-organisational learning, that the lessons from complaints are captured and demonstrated clearly to your residents as well. Really sort of ensuring that staff are supported to be open and learn from complaints, and that it's okay to have a complaint made about you, and it's okay to have got things wrong. The important bit is what you do next. It's sort of, so how do you stop that happening again? How do you learn where things could be done better next time? And I think boards really do have a role in that sort of making sure that leaders are sort of supporting staff in that area. Okay. So just so we're all clear, so the Ombudsman will use the code when we are looking at complaints, we are investigating complaints from your residents. We will use the code when we are looking at how you responded to a complaint, particularly if complaint handling is part of the complaint that was made to us. Okay, and your self-assessment we may well look at to see if there's any divergences from the code. So if you're not applying the standards in the code, you may have good reason, and we would ask that you put that in your self-assessment, and that you made your self-assessment available either in your annual report or on your website, so our investigators can look and see what your reasonings were, but also that your residents can look and see how you're complying with the code. Okay, so we will be using it as a tool, and we suggest that you do the same. Okay, so that was sort of a whistle-stop tour of the code, really. I'm just going to move on to some of the other changes that are in hand that I touched upon last time, just to make sure you've got a full update in everything that's going on. So the new Housing Ombudsman Scheme came into effect from the 1st of September 2020. That was, we intended to bring it in April, but we delayed it because of COVID. But it is now in force. We have to have approval from the Secretary of State before we can change our scheme, and that's all in hand. That's all been approved. So the new scheme is now on the website. Similarly, very much of the scheme hasn't changed. Its paragraph numbers may have changed as the scheme got reordered, but much of the content remains the same. However, there are some significant changes that you should be aware of. So there is a new power for us to carry out wider investigations where we believe there is evidence of potential systemic failing. There's also now an obligation or expectation to deal with complaints in line with the scheme and the complaint handling code that's a bit more explicit than it was in the previous version. And we have a new power to issue complaint handling failure orders when we think that complaint handling is non-compliant with the code without good reason. So those membership obligations, I'm sorry, I just noticed there's an O missing from obligations there. Less speed, sorry. Okay, so this is all set out in the scheme. So as a condition of membership, a landlord must agree to be bound by the terms of the scheme, establish and maintain a complaints procedure in accordance with any good practice recommended by the Ombudsman, so that would be our complaint handling code, must inform residents of their right to bring the complaints to the Ombudsman, should publish your complaints procedure and make information about it easily accessible on your website and in correspondence with residents. So if you don't have a website, we're not expecting you to get a website particularly in place just to share your complaint handling process. But if you do have a website, then your complaint handling process should be on it, is what we're trying to say. And we're just that focus in sort of trying to increase accessibility to deal with that point that came out from residents in the sort of green paper early stages. Okay. So to manage your complaints in accordance with your published procedure, or where this is not possible, within a reasonable timescale. So for many years, we have seen residents who have landlords who have perfectly fine complaints procedures, but actually when you compare what happened to an individual trying to raise a complaint with the complaints procedure, the divergences can be vast. So we're asking you to do what you say you're going to do, and again, provide information to the Ombudsman within a reasonable timescale. And just to go back to that last point, we do understand that there will always be a complaint that doesn't fit within, that you can't resolve within those timescales, or you can't, that there is something that takes it outside of those published procedures. And we're not saying that that is necessarily a bad thing, but just if you are not dealing with it in line with what you say you're going to do, you need to be giving good explanations to that resident so they know what's going on and they understand the reasoning behind behind that action. Okay. So the systemic investigations, and I did touch on this last time. So within the scheme, there's a new paragraph that allows us to conduct these further investigations beyond a sort of initial complaint or an initial landlord, to look at whether there is evidence of a service failure that might be systemic. Okay, so this is new. It's not particularly new to ombudsmen generally. Lots of ombudsmen have action to go further than this. They have own initiative power, so they can investigate whatever and wherever they see something that they want to investigate. So we are sort of saying that ours would still be linked to the complaints that we see, but we would like to be able to go further than we can at the minute. Particularly whilst the regulator's consumer standard is quite a high bar for the regulator to get involved. So we thought we could do more at looking to see if there was an issue and suggesting things that might help with that issue. Okay. So we've identified two different types of investigations that we may undertake. One would be a systemic investigation, which would be looking at a particular landlord, and one would be wider, that would sort of look at an issue across the sector. So just as a sort of theoretical example, so we may in a complaint see missed appointments were a real issue for a particular complainant, and we might then decide that we'll look further and look at that particular landlord to see, is that an issue in general? Is something going on with their contractors? Is there something going on and in that particular landlord? Or we might say, is this a thematic issue? Is this a problem across the sector? Should we be looking at is this contractor all over the, is it having similar problems across the sector? Are loads of residents experiencing problems with missed appointments? That's just a theoretical example. Obviously, that's quite a I don't know how we would do that. I don't know how we'd get the evidence, but it's those sort of issues and the difference between just looking at an individual landlord and a sector-wide issue. Okay, so update on where we're at with this. So we have recruited the team now, although they're not all in post yet. I think the last person takes up post the beginning of January. So the team will be starting to sort of form and get themselves in place and work out how best to assess our evidence to identify how to take these forward. So we've been working on a framework for these investigations. It was approved by our senior leadership team last week, so it'll be on our website in November, which were just sort of setting out what the triggers might be for these investigations, how we would notify, how we would conduct some of the investigations and what the outcomes might be. So there's some better information coming to the website quite soon. And the team, as I said, my first member of the team starts next week. So I will actually just wait and get their input to the framework before we post it out there, but it will definitely be in November. Okay, so we also have now this power to issue complaint handling failure orders, and they are related to the code. So we can issue them where there's non-compliance without good reason with the complaint handling code, where your residents having difficulty in accessing the complaints process, where you're not accepting a valid complaint, where you're not progressing a complaint, or where you're failing to provide evidence to support investigation. Now, what I would say is that for all of these, we're not just going to see it and issue you with a complaint handling failure order. Our process is that there must be at least 3 contacts with the landlord to explain what the problem is and what action we're asking them to take to move things along. And that those ought to be in through different routes as well. So certainly in the past we've had caseworkers who go, oh, this landlord won't respond, I've emailed and emailed and emailed, and I go and look at it and yeah, they've emailed and emailed and emailed to an email address that doesn't work. So we're taking steps to make sure that actually we do have contact with the landlord before these are issued. We will be keeping records of how many and who these are issued to, and we will be publishing these, and they'll be reported to the regulator just as information sharing rather than not being referred for action, but we will share the information with the regulator. So we've been issuing these in shadow to see how it works, to see to sort of get some sense of it, and so far 4 have been issued. So 3 in relation to just no progression of the complaint. And what I can tell you about those is that for 2 of them, they're quite small organisations, and I think it's quite useful for us because what we're seeing is that for some organisations it actually gives us a clearer picture of where they're struggling and actually where we need to be directing our sector development engagement activities to help support them get to the place they need to be. One, however, was a fairly large, I would say frequent flyer. We get lots of complaints from them. They know what to do. They just didn't do it. Okay, so sort of those are the 3 in relation to the individuals stuck in the complaints process. And then we've had one sort of, again, fairly large landlord who repeatedly promised to get evidence to us, knew what evidence we wanted, kept saying it would be with us by a certain date, and then just went into complete radio silence and we couldn't get a response at all. So those are the 4 shadow complaint handling failure orders that have been issued so far. Again, these are just sort of in the trial period, so these will not be reported to the regulator, just to give you some sort of sense of scale. Okay, so the timings around the code. Code was issued on the 7th of July, and so that, from then on we've been looking at complaint handling failure orders, and as I said, 4 have been issued in shadow. Landlords are asked to self-assess by the end of the year, 31st of December. That's a self-assessment for you, not for the Ombudsman. We don't need to see them, but what I would say is that publish your assessment, so then if we do investigate, we can see if there are any discrepancies, what your reasoning is, and we might well ask to see a copy of it in our evidence requests going forward, and report your outcome to your board. The purpose of the self-assessment is really as a sort of tool for you to see how you're doing against the code, to highlight any areas where there's discrepancies, so you can think about whether you want to make improvements there, or if there are reasons why you need to keep it the way it is. And then if you are going to change your policies or procedures, then we would ask that that was done and in place by the 31st of March. Okay. We will start issuing complaint handling failure orders from January 2021 onwards, although if those relate to those policy changes, it's likely that we would keep it in shadow. Okay, so as I've said, we are really aiming to be proportionate and making sure that landlords have had at least 3 opportunities to put something right before we issue these complaint handling failure orders. In many cases, that actually turns out to be a lot more, because by the time a caseworker has referred up to a manager to say, I can't get anywhere, it's usually been far more times than 3. Okay, I don't think I've got anything else to say about those for now. Again, I hope you can see the sort of correlation with the code. It's all sort of trying to keep landlords responding to residents within a timely fashion. Okay. We're also, you may have been aware of this, that we are really trying to increase openness and transparency of what we do and how we do it and what we see from our complaints, to sort of, so we are publishing, there will be quarterly insight reports. I think we've done 2 this year. 3rd one is due again, probably November, and we'll be looking at our sort of COVID complaints that we've had in that. We're also doing sort of thematic reports, and again, part of that systemic thematic team will be looking at these reports that just sort of pull together some of the information and learning from the complaints that we see. So the most recent one we issued was about leasehold complaints, so a new lease of life, which again, if you haven't seen and you're dealing with lots of leaseholders, it's on our website. I think it's got something like 29 recommendations that would help improve complaint handling in relation to leasehold complaints. So again, might be worth having a look if you are dealing with leasehold complaints. We've just issued a report on the severe maladministration cases that we dealt with last financial year. So these we do share with the regulator, and so they're out there for residents to see. There's just 5 of them. The landlords are named. So again, it might be worth having a look if you want to see some of the worst complaint handling we've seen. We are also about to publish landlord reports which set out the cases for each individual landlord where we issued a determination last year. We will be publishing their landlord report, which basically sets out what complaints we saw, how many, how quickly they dealt with them, and what they were about. If you are one of those landlords, you should have had a version of that report sent to you for verification and checking. If you think you haven't had that, do let us know, because they are in the process of the team are just going through all of them and checking them with the landlords before they go up on the website. We will be publishing all determinations, and again, the landlord reports, the aim is to have those up by December, and the determinations will be sort of February, March. It's a bigger piece of work getting our casework system to talk to our website, but that's the intention at the minute, is to get them up by certainly March. So again, the landlords will be named, the case will be anonymised other than that, so that individuals are not identifiable, and the aim is to publish sort of 3 months after the final decision, so that if any legal action challenge was to be made, that those would have been dealt with, would have come up already. Okay, so again, you can look out for that, and eventually we should have there should be, everything should be out there published, and you'll be able to filter and search to look at similar cases to give some ideas of responses. And that would include, no maladministration findings and outside jurisdictions, so you get a much better view of what we can't look at and how we would deal with things. As I've already mentioned, we will publish the sort of quarterly numbers of complaint handling failure orders. If we do refer a case to the regulator, as we always have, we would publish that on our website, so you would have details of that. And our systemic and thematic investigations, we will be publishing things like notification of when an investigation starts, requests for evidence, and then the outcomes of those investigations would also be published. Again, as I say, we're just recruiting the team, and there will be some initial sort of work that we need to undertake before those we're ready to properly investigate. But the overarching framework will be on the website next month. Okay, and I think that is me done. Yes, there you go. So it's over to you now. And I need my pen.
Right, thanks, Emma. That was you've been dead busy, haven't you, over the summer?
I've been busy. Can you see how much I've aged?
Yeah. No, it was a really useful canter through the code, but also your powers and lots of other stuff. I'd just like to reiterate what Emma was saying about the FAQs on the Ombudsman's site. They helpfully follow the same format as the code itself, and so yeah, that is a source of other information for you. We've got a bunch of questions here that I'll rattle through. Do use the Q&A function to put your questions to Emma. So first up is from Denise, Emma, and she's saying, does the three-step process include the complaint being dealt with at board level?
I guess it depends. It really depends what your process is. So if your process is that's your third step, then that's your third stage. But I don't know. It depends what your board involvement is. Does your board issue the final decision? Right.
Well, I think it's just a general question. I mean, I think your point is that people should really be trying to nail things down to a two-stage process unless absolutely necessary, because obviously a two-stage process allows for an appeal. I guess my question around this might be, do you think it's good practice to have the board involved in deciding, being the last arbiter on complaints, or is that them meddling too much in operational activity? Again, it's really important they champion the organisation's approach to complaints and set the tone and the culture to take an oversight, but should they really be getting involved in complaints?
It would be unusual. I have to say, I don't know of I can't think of an organisation that uses the board as the final decision maker. Certainly the presentations we have done to boards have been much more focused on that role of that I talked about, of sort of learning from complaints and supporting the organisation to effectively learn from complaints and promoting the culture that complaints are a good thing.
And I guess seeking assurance from the executive team that the organisation has a completely robust and compliant complaint system.
Yeah.
Right. Jayatika Patel saying, oh, this was when I used to be a housing officer, and I was a really good housing officer, Emma. I really was, really responsive. And I'd sort out my complaints. But the problem with vexatious tenants, have you got any advice for dealing with vexatious tenants?
Yeah, again, I sort of just feel like I'm promoting our website ridiculously today. There is some guidance on the website about unacceptable behaviour. I think with vexatious complainants, is what you need to do is separate out the behaviour and the complaint. So make sure you're dealing with the issue that the complaint of the complaint, but you also need to deal with the behaviour. And if they are completely pursuing something unreasonably, then you are fully entitled to say, right, we're not looking at this. But then they need to have a route into, if they do have a valid complaint, they need to be able to make it, I think is what. So we see some organisations will do things like, here's an email address, nobody's going to check this except for once a month, and we will go through and see if there's any new issues, and if there is, we will process them as complaints, and your responsive repairs emergency number is here, you know, so that you're making sure they still can access the things that they need to access, but that you can deal with the behaviour quite firmly, and you identify any issues that need to be addressed in terms of what the complaint that they're bringing, and deal with those in accordance with your complaints policy. In my head, those are the two things that we always say. It's the sort of manage the behaviour and manage the complaint.
And I guess, yeah, communicate that difference quite clearly.
Yeah.
No, that's great. Thank you for that. And Denise is back again with, yeah, in your code, obviously you set out anticipated backstop timescales for acknowledging a complaint, first and second stage, et cetera, et cetera. So Denise is saying, have you, as the Ombudsman, got timescales for handling cases? Because in her experience, there was certainly a case that took months to respond and the Ombudsman to respond and move forward on.
Yeah, I would certainly say that we have been guilty of some of this ourselves, which is why we know how not to do it. We have we have key performance indicators in our business plan that are monitored by MHCLG. So at the minute, our investigation times are, I think, 5.6 months for an investigation, average case time. So you'll get some that are dealt with quicker and some that are dealt with longer, but the average case time is that. Next year's business commitment plan is to bring that down to 3 to 4 months. So we are undergoing massive recruitment, massive changes in our sort of casework structure. So we're introducing a triage team to better identify cases that can be dealt with more swiftly, and cases that may be suitable for mediation, early resolution, that the triage team will then pick up and do. So we are certainly, the drive and focus of our organisation is always about determination times and how we get those down. What I can say is that, if you looked at us 2 years ago, it would not be unusual for a determination to take over 12 months. We've really, really worked to get those cases down, but there's still more we can do. And certainly our telephone staff, the staff that deal with cases whilst they're still in the complaints procedure, we're really low on numbers at the minute, so we are just recruiting to them. They're actually having to take a couple of days off phones each week, where we're just taking messages. We're so low on staff, so you may experience some difficulties there, but I would hope that actually that we have enough in place to stop that being a problem. But again, I would say if you are really experiencing difficulties in getting a response from us, drop me an email. I'll find out what's going on for you. Don't tell everyone that though.
Right. Okay. So that's excellent. And just, as we go forward, sort of acknowledging that you're, if you like, held to account by the department, and you're actually setting, what sound like quite ambitious targets to shorten your timescales. Will you be publishing your performance transparently so that not just the department can see your performance, but the rest of the sector and tenants?
Yeah, we do publish it in our annual report, but I guess we could do more about getting that up quarterly or something, how we were doing. If that would be of interest, we could do that.
Yeah, well, I think so, because I think the regulator, certainly as a regulator, has kind of developed its it is quite transparent about its performance with the sector. So I think that would be a good thing.
Yeah.
Sue Atkinson saying, can we please have a copy of these slides? Yes, we'll be putting them on the website along with the recording of this. And Emma, if you can just send me these slides, we'll get them whacked on for you, yeah?
Sure.
Fab. Susan Croft's question is, it takes us a little bit back to the vexatious tenants question. She's saying, have you got a view about unreasonable tenants, like particularly where they're making unreasonable demands for information or responses to questions? I think this really is along the lines of the vexatious tenant, isn't it?
Yeah, it would. Well, my answer would be very similar. I think, you know, obviously if it's for subject access requests, then you have to comply with that, and you have to comply with it within those particular timescales. And I wouldn't like to get to tell you what to do if it's subject access request, because that's Information Commissioner. I wouldn't want to tread on their territory. But if it's you know, repeated requests in relation to complaints, I think you can. It is that you manage the behaviour, so you find a way for them to be able to put what they want to you, but you don't necessarily have to respond to everything you've responded to before. So you just have to find a way of managing that behaviour. And again, I would suggest the sort of, you know, your emails will be checked once a month, or as long as there's some way that they can report those emergency repairs if they need to. But that would be fine. I think, you know, we would prefer to see that you're managing it than being driven demented and letting them run you.
And I mean, the other part of our question is, what's your view on an unreasonable tenant policy? I guess this is where the landlord's kind of setting out its expectations of how, you know, it will try and do whatever it can for the tenant and sort out their issues, but they do have certain expectations of behaviour from tenants. I mean, what's your view on a landlord setting out its expectations there?
Oh, I think it's absolutely fine.
Yeah.
I mean, I can, when I send you the slides, I can send you our unacceptable behaviour policy, if that would be useful.
Oh, that would be dead good. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah. I think it just fits in that broader brush thing that it is a two-way relationship, you know, being customer focused, but not being kind of walked all over, I suppose.
Yeah.
Tony Malloy saying, yeah, he's just asking for clarity about the self-assessment. So we don't forward the self-assessment to you, but share with the board and publish the self-assessment. And yes, and then the point is they pick up any subsequent changes to the policy by the 31st of March. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So you don't want to see the self-assessment. It should be published for transparency's sake, so that tenants can see it. And any gaps identified by the self-assessment should be done and dusted 31st of March.
Yeah.
Fab. I haven't had a chance to read through these things. Yes, Judith Kerwick is saying, with regards to the timescale for the self-assessment, is it worth aligning the self-assessment timescales with the tenant annual report, i.e., to fall in with the financial year? Because that's when they tend to publish complaints information in the annual report to tenants.
Yeah, well, you could do it by the you know, the timescale that we have, and then share it with your residents at your annual report date. That would be fine.
Right. Okay. I'm just trying to. I'm sure you probably said it. Is this an annual self-assessment, or is this just?
It isn't necessarily. It's a one-off assessment that we may, in going forward, if we see things in our investigations that we think, oh, what's gone on here, we may get you to do the self-assessment again. We may sort of order that as a sort of, you know, you need to just check what's going on. But it wasn't intended to be a sort of annual assessment, unless you as it's up to you as an organisation. If you think that would be useful, then by all means, go ahead. But we weren't intending to you to do it every year, because
Right. Okay, no, that's good. But I suppose any organisation worth its salt, once it's kind of cracked something, got a policy up and running, it would want to review that for its effectiveness anyway. Okay, Chris Deacon, again about the self-assessment. He's just saying, is this something every provider has to complete?
Yeah. Nice simple answer.
That's an easy one, isn't it? Yeah. Right, and Kate Marie Foster says, again, you see, the self-assessment, it's a popular subject, this. There's a question regarding reasonable and fair exclusions that require evidence. Can you give any examples of this type of evidence?
I guess I would probably need to know what exclusion you were thinking of, but the most common exclusions that we see are things that are being referred to insurance, or things that have gone to court, or things that have been dealt with already, have already gone through the complaints procedure, or things that are woefully out of time. So all we would be wanting you to do is to have evidence to back up why you thought that was those exclusions were appropriate.
Yeah. And obviously the kind of evidence would depend on, like you say, the specific reason for the exclusion. Right. Okay. I'll carry on cracking through. We've got Leanne Donald Whitney saying, just so I'm clear, where a resident expresses a level of dissatisfaction with a service or staff member, we should log through the formal complaints procedure and resolve through that approach. Whereas currently the expression of dissatisfaction first time, we seek to resolve at first point of contact. And if the resident remains dissatisfied, then we formalise it through a formal complaints procedure.
We've had this come up quite a lot, and I think what our view is that, bear in mind that the aim of the code is sort of, or part of the aims is that swift complaint response. So we wouldn't want to undermine those quick resolutions that are not formally registered as a complaint. So we wouldn't want to stop them, but what we would say is that you should be recording them somehow. You should be capturing the learning and what's going on there somehow. And the minute that resident says, that's not, I'm not satisfied, it should be registered as a formal complaint. So our only concern that we have with those sort of 0 stage or local resolution, whatever you call them, is that sometimes people get stuck there, and then there's actually no evidence of what's been going on. We just get a resident saying, I spoke to them on the telephone on this day and nothing's happened, and then the landlord doesn't have any records either, because it's in those it's in that sort of stage 0, so which makes it very difficult for the resident to know how to escalate or what to do. So I think it's fine to have those 0 stages, and excuse my terminology if that's not what you call it, but make sure that you move people out of there fairly swiftly if it isn't resolved, because that really is key to making sure you're dealing with expressions of dissatisfaction as a complaint.
And Susan Cross just saying, following on from the previous question about the stage 3, if an organisation decides that a stage 3 is a legitimate part of their process, what kind of examples, or who would you recommend should hear that stage 3 appeal?
If I had to recommend, I would say that I would recommend that there would be some resident involvement in that, whether it be a tenant panel or a tenant member that sits in. I think is quite important.
And I think that was always the thrust of the Localism Act, wasn't it? Was to have that kind of tenant panel Right, Judith Kerwick again saying, as far as redress is concerned, some tenants ask for more unreasonable financial redress that are outside the association's compensation policy. Will the Ombudsman address this in their determination?
Yeah, because often that is the crux of why they've come to us. So yeah, we will usually go through why what the complaint was and how it was handled and how the compensation was assessed, and we will consider whether that was fair in all the circumstances. That there is a policy guidance would be one of the circumstances we would take into account. But there will always be cases that are so extreme or circumstances that don't fit within the policy where you might be expected to have acted outside of your policy.
Right, thanks for that. And we're on to the last one now. We've only got a couple of minutes left, 1 minute left, in fact. Kate Marie Foster, do we need to send out a satisfaction survey at each stage, or is a line in the letter saying that they have a right to tell us if they're unhappy? Is that sufficient enough just to have that in the letter?
I think as long as your line is clear on what they need to do if they are dissatisfied or how they need to escalate, I think that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah, the point is, again, it's all about comms, isn't it? Just about communicating that they have a right, if they're not satisfied at this point, to come back and have another go, as it were.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think that's all the questions for now. I think I've just got a very quick one for you. In terms of publishing complaints, handling performance, have you got a twinkling in your eye what that might look like at all?
I don't imagine it would be much more than a sort of how many, what landlord, what was it for? You know, what was the issue?
Right.
I imagine it would just be a fairly basic table that just keeps an eye on what we're doing, what we're seeing.
What do you reckon to Inside Housing's index? Because they tried to come up with a mathematical model, didn't they? So you won't be doing anything like that.
No, we won't be doing anything. I mean, that came about from a Freedom of Information request asking us for data, and then they did something with the data that we presented it in a way that we wouldn't. I think there's always some difficulties with our data to some degree, because one complaint, if you only have one complaint in a year that is maladministration finding, you've got 100% maladministration. So we're trying ourselves to get some better data looking at geography. Are we seeing more complaints from particular areas, or is there anything more insightful we can see other than cities? Yes, we get more complaints from highly populated, highly dense areas. We're trying to do more of that rather than a sort of league tables thing, because I don't know, league tables, I'm not sure how insightful or helpful they are.
Exactly.
It was interesting, but we got more queries about Inside Housing.
No, they did exactly the same with the Regulator's unit costs. The problem is organisations like you have to put some information out in the public domain, but it's really difficult to control what others choose to do with it, including Channel 4 documentary makers, I guess. But
there's not one of those here, is there?
Oh, no. I think we're all right.
Hang on a minute.
No, you're fine. Emma, that was brilliant. Really comprehensive. Again, there's lots of resources on your website. You mentioned and I mentioned the FAQs that are emerging there. We're going to put your slides on. We've recorded this. It'll all be on our website. Thanks again for agreeing to speak to us. We would like to see you again at some point in the future, if that's possible.
That's fine. You'll be sick of me soon, but that's absolutely fine. And thank you all for your questions.
Yeah, well, I think we've still got a way to go, not least of which is what might happen to the democratic filter. So and the the relationship between you and the regulator. So I don't think it's all, the ink's not dry on any of this. So it would be great to see you again.
That's fine.
Brilliant. And thanks everybody else for tuning in today. We've got one left in this series. That's the CIH later this week. If you're not signed up to it, get yourself signed up to it. Thanks everyone, and bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.